This is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 332.
My mother has this wonderful saying. I know she didn't create it, but I attribute it to her. Tell the time, don't build the clock. Many of us are clock builders when we communicate. So if we can have the right mindset and approach, we structure our messages and we work on being concise and clear, we can be much better communicators in any situation, but especially spontaneous speaking.
G'day, this is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 332. And our guest today is Matt Abrahams, the author of Think Faster, Talk Smarter, on managing your reputation before you enter a room, thinking on your feet and getting to the point.
I am your host, Greg Layton, founder of Chiefmaker and the Council of Chiefs. And I believe there is a great chief in all of us. And that through listening to the stories, strategies and techniques of great CEOs, each of you can find and leave your own legacy through your work. The Inner Chief Podcast is where you will learn how to think and make moves like a CEO. For over a decade, I've helped CEOs and senior executives around the world boldly lead change, inspire their people, and leave a legacy. So every 2 weeks, I'll bring a deep diving interview with one of these CEOs or another one of a mid to large organisation so you can find your own path to greatness as an executive.
In this episode, I chat to the wonderful Matt Abrahams. Matt is a leading expert in communication with decades of experience as an educator, author, podcast host, and coach. As a lecturer in organisational behaviour at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, he teaches popular classes in strategic communication and effective virtual presenting. Matt is also a sought-after keynote speaker and communication consultant. He has helped countless presenters prepare for and deliver IPO roadshows, TED Talks, World Economic Forum presentations, and even Nobel Prize presentations. He is the author of Think Faster, Talk Smarter, How to Speak Successfully When You're Put on the Spot, and his previous book, Speaking Up Without Freaking Out, 50 Techniques for Confident and Compelling Presenting, has helped thousands of people manage speaking anxiety and present more confidently and authentically. Today, you're going to hear Matt talk all about how you can actively build your reputation and make great first impressions, why you need to train for spontaneous on-the-spot conversations, what martial arts has taught him about managing his physiology when communicating effectively, his 6-step method to think faster and talk smarter, and a foolproof way to construct the perfect email. Chief, one of the core skills of all great chiefs is the ability to interview and recruit the very best performers to your team. Now, many chiefs say to me that they get up to 25 or even 40% of their recruitment decisions wrong. Now, many of you who listen to this show will know that over the last 6 years, we have asked dozens of CEOs what is their number one interview question when recruiting for senior roles. What we have done is turn that into an invaluable resource. It is the 30 most powerful interview questions used by CEOs to hire high performers. These are the questions that reveal the true nature of the person in front of you. They are the ones that give or create that truth-telling moment that will help you decide whether to hire or not. Chief, if you want this resource, just go to chiefmaker.com/interview and just pop in your details and download the detailed PDF. Chief, before we get into today's episode, if you would like to nominate a CEO as guest of this show, drop us a line with your nominated guest on info@chiefmaker.com.au and we'll check out and see if they are the kind of chief we want to have on our show. Without any further introduction, let's hear from the magnificent Matt Abrahams. Chiefs, I'm here with the one and only Matt Abrahams. professor, podcast host, speaker, martial artist, which I also love. I want to talk about that, Matt. Matt is all about think fast, talk smart. Welcome to the Inner Chief.
I am thrilled to be here with you, Greg. You and I have talked casually over the past several months, and I'm excited to have a formal conversation that others can listen into.
Yeah, look, this is such an important topic. And if you're no business school out there, Matt, ever talks about how important it is to think on your feet, be a great presenter. And yet one of our principles at Chiefmaker is the performance theatre of executives. There's only two, right? One is meetings and talking to people, and the other is the technical work of your role.
Mm-hmm.
So half, in fact, where all of your reputation and brand is made is what you're an expert in. So dial in, people. We're about to get into some real stuff that will help you not only just be more influential, but improve your brand reputation, de-stress life a bit. Hey, don't we just wouldn't mind a few things really a bit less stressful these days? So Matt, before we get into the detail, we have a great tradition at the Inner Chief podcast, all about where did you come from? Can you tell a bit of a story that sums up your childhood and early life?
Yeah, so I grew up in a suburb of Silicon Valley before it was Silicon Valley. I grew up in a small community that's grown a bit as a result of Silicon Valley. I used to walk to school through walnut orchards. It's not like I had a rural upbringing, but now there are lots of big houses where I used to walk through. My mother was a teacher. I think that's where I got my passion for teaching and insights into just interacting with others. And my father was a lawyer, and he was very into logic, argumentation, et cetera. So I sort of had this yin yang development in my communication as an early child. My mother, who is very dialed into making sure that people are connected and led with emotion, and my father, who was very documented and very structured and very factual in his work. And I think that's helped me very much. And throughout my childhood and into my adulthood, I've always been interested in and fascinated by communication. As somebody with my last name, Abrahams, I always went first in school. I was always called on just alphabetically. So I got used to this notion of being put on the spot and having to respond. And it's something that I came to learn was not as comfortable for many people. I just had to become used to it because that's all that ever happened for me.
Yeah. Like what my kids are probably starting to learn how to do is they start to play off their parents. Like they go and ask one, then they go and ask the other. When you did that, did you start adjusting your style because you knew your mum was a teacher and your dad was a lawyer?
Oh, absolutely. No. And I see it with my kids. I see it with my students. I co-teach this class at Stanford's Business School. And no, I mean, it's fundamental strategic communication is you figure out who's the right parent, who's the right teacher to go and have the conversation with. But therein lies a fundamental issue with communication, is that you have to understand your audience. One of the biggest mistakes, if not the biggest mistake people make, is they think that their communication is all about what they want to say. Rather, it's about what the audience needs to hear. And if we just rely on what we knew as young kids, is you have to adjust and adapt your communication for the people you talk to. The way I would ask my mother to give me permission to stay out after curfew was very different than the way I asked my father. And, sometimes I was successful, sometimes I wasn't. I'm certain, like my wife and I do today, they chatted and figured, they were way ahead of me, but I thought I was being very crafty. But that idea in instinct as a kid to adjust and adapt is critical today in what we do as adults.
I had a gentleman on our podcast quite a long time ago called Jeff Brown, who does the Read to Lead podcast, and he's a former radio announcer. And so I actually engaged him to coach me a bit in how to be a better podcaster.
Yes.
And he said, just make sure you get a little avatar, a picture of an example of one of your subscribers or person. So I actually took a LinkedIn image of one of my clients. And when I started out, I pinned them on the wall. So that I was like, I'm talking to this person.
Yes.
What would they want me to say if I was in a one-to-one? And that actually really helped me in those early days. So what you're saying there is that technique has definitely helped me. Yeah.
No, I love it. I love that you envision that. What I do to help me with these virtual calls, I actually have a picture of my family that I tape right behind my camera. On most days, I like my family,
Yeah.
and it's pleasant and nice to actually look at those folks rather than this little light next to this lens that I'm supposed to connect to people through. So your notion, I think, is a wonderful one. We connect with people. We don't connect with technology. We don't connect with the ether. So having an image, having an idea of who you're speaking to makes a lot of sense.
What was your first ever job?
So my first job, interestingly enough, where I got paid, let's say that,
Yeah, paid job.
I've been studying martial arts for over 40 years.
Wow.
And my first job was teaching a class to young children. So I made it to about mid rank, between where I had started and getting the black belt, my first black belt. And my instructor, who ran the school, saw that I was able to teach and that I enjoyed teaching. And so they had some young kids, kids around between 5 and 8. And I was asked to teach them for about 30 minutes a couple times a week. And for that, he paid me a little bit of money. So I was about 14 and a half, 15 when I started doing that. Nice. But it was wonderful. I enjoyed it. The kids were fun. My parents loved the fact that I had to show up somewhere on time and actually deliver. So my first job was as a karate instructor as a young lad.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that in just 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Before we do that, your first ever car.
My first ever car?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So my uncle had an extra car. It was a Mazda Cosmo. A Mazda Cosmo was a rotary engine car. It was one of the first rotary engine cars. Wow. It had a choke, which I still to this day don't understand why it had that. We used to call it the popcorn mobile, because it was older when I had it, and the engine would sound like popcorn popping. Yeah. But it was a lot of fun. Nobody had a car like it. It was quite the thing.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about martial arts for a second.
Sure.
Quite a number of the chiefs we've had on the show have done a lot of martial arts. 40 years in your case.
Yeah.
How has it shaped you, like that, staying involved that long, shaped you both sort of in your life and then at work?
Yeah. So to me, it's been very important. And over the arc of my studying, over the arc of my life, what I've gained from it has changed. I initially started for self-defense. It's not like I grew up in a challenging area, but my parents had a sense that I could use some self-confidence building. So I started just learning self-defense, and I fell in love with it. I had an older cousin who it was several years my senior, who had been studying it, and I was always impressed with what he could do and with him as a person, wanted to emulate him. So I started there, and I began to learn the power of presence, that is being in the moment, the ability to listen. To me, listening isn't just about what's said, it's how one is in the world and paying attention to that. I've loved that the life lessons I've learned in the karate studio come quick, come fast, and sometimes with very immediate impact, literally. But to me, it's a crucible where I can test out ways of being in the world and push myself to places that I didn't know that I could achieve. And yeah, how it's applied in my daily life, it's given me patience. It's helped me really be present. It's helped me understand the connection that we can have. The martial arts, a lot of people focus on the martial. You watch, mixed martial arts competitions, you look at the Olympics, and there's a lot of martial, and I enjoy that part of it. But there's an art to it as well. There's a beauty, there's a connection, there's a peacefulness that comes. And the more you study, the longer you study, if you're with the right people studying, it can become quite an inner journey. And for me, it's really helped me be present. It's helped me connect. It's helped me stay calm in intense situations. And all of that, I think, has made me a better person, a better teacher, a better partner, a better friend. And I find it very rewarding.
I bet. Now, Matt, early in your career, you were involved in worldwide education roles, a bit with SAP, a bit with Open Wave, I think it is.
Yes.
These are challenging kind of roles when you're trying to educate people in multiple jurisdictions, different countries, different cultures within. What did you learn during this time about how different kinds of people learned?
Yeah, and that's fundamental, and it's something that I studied in school and in graduate school, so it wasn't surprising to me, but it was awesome to see it play out in the real world. To me, furthering employees' careers, developing their talents and their skills is paramount to having a successful business, to attracting and retaining employees. So I see education as a critical component of every business. It's the way you are agile, it's the way you adapt, and it's the way you adjust. Many companies see training as a necessary evil. I don't believe it at all. In fact, I think education can be proactive support. It can be a large part of why people come to a company, stay at a company. And I learned a lot about how people learn differently, how different cultures put different focus area on learning and education. And I learned a lot about how to exert influence when you don't have direct power in the circumstances. You know, when you are developing training and education globally for a company, you have to rely on the goodwill of a lot of people because you need subject matter experts, you need cultural and context matter experts. And I learned a lot about how to collaborate, how to incent people that didn't directly report to me. And if I was successful at anything or most proud of anything I did in those roles, is I helped people be better at their jobs, more importantly, to be better human beings in terms of what they were doing, but also the ability to move an agenda forward without having the direct influence that somebody who has, you know, direct line reporting could do.
Yeah, it's about as hard as it gets in business, right? When you don't have line authority and you've got influence across, particularly across borders, cultures.
You bet.
It's really tricky, right?
Absolutely.
Let's get into some of the science and tech, Matt. So, as we said at the beginning, communication and reputation are built in these kind of, when we talk and communicate. What does the science say about impression building? Like, is there anything out there in research that says, hey, this is what people glean from you and what they start to believe about you just from communicating?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we all need to remember to say that, you know, impression is important, and long lasting. I think people know that.
Yep.
But what I think people forget is it is the totality of your presence that matters. You know, I tell this story when I was the leader in the leadership roles that we just talked about, where I was interviewing. We grew incredibly rapidly. When I was at Ariba, which is now part of SAP, I mean, we grew. I mean, it was a rocket ship. And I was constantly interviewing people. And there was a gentleman who was very well qualified on paper, who I happened to have an office that overlooked the parking lot. And I see this guy pulling in his car. He cuts off somebody else for a parking spot, runs in. Turns out he's rude to the receptionist, comes in and nails the interview. Perfect interview. I mean, great. But we didn't hire him because when we looked at who he was, the entirety of his impression, that was not somebody we wanted. We didn't want somebody who was rude, somebody who put themselves ahead of others. So that's a pretty dramatic example of what I'm trying to get across, which is when it comes to impression management, you need to think about the totality, how you show up, not just in the high stakes situations where you really curate your impressions, but in the everyday interactions. And that's really important. And it is the entirety of your impression that matters. And so I challenge people in the work I do to really think about what are the values you stand for? How do you execute those values? How do you demonstrate those values? And that's what matters for impression management. And part of impression management is to take the time to check in with people to see if what you think your impression is jives with what theirs is. We are not the best judges of our communication or how we come off to others. So finding trusted others who can give you insight and input is really important.
And that is such a good point. I remember a story about a really great football player here in Australia who's a really big presence at training. And he said to me once, he actually ended up going on to be the captain of the national team. And he was at training one day and he was really flat. And this was before he was captain. He was an up-and-comer. Right. And the captain, who was this great wild guy called George Gregan, he came over and said, "Hey, mate, are you okay?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm just not up for training." He goes, "Hey, you can't be like this." And he goes, "Everyone's flat because you are. So either get your game on or go home." Right. And I thought, yeah, it's so true what you're saying, because there's all these moments when you just roll into a meeting room or you just turn up to a one-to-one and that sinks into people, right? One of the best lines I ever heard was, your reputation is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah. Yeah, my favorite line about reputation is it's the echo that enters the room before you do. That's your
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and I like that. A colleague of mine, Allison Kluger,
Yeah.
who teaches reputation management at Stanford's
Ah,
Business School, uses that line, and I think it's so apropos of what we mean by reputation and impression management. It's the echo that enters the room before you, and I
people
like
that
that.
you leave after you go.
Yeah, and it's what you leave after, but
Yeah,
it really precedes you. I mean, how people see you
absolutely.
is what your
Yeah.
reputation is all about.
Now, Chief, do you want to take your game to a new level or that of your people? Our mini MBA in leading high performance teams now has the highest NPS of any mini MBA style program in Australia at 91. Why? Because when you do the program, you get immediate and tangible performance improvement. You get dedicated time working on the business as opposed to away from it. We have a practical, real-world approach that we teach frameworks that you implement in your business as we go, and then you share and learn with your peers and with me as your coach. So the cost benefit is immediate, right? The weekly coaching sessions are live and you get a chance to ask questions direct to me and of your peers. And the time management is completely achievable because you're only spending a couple of hours a week on this at max, and those 2 hours are actually working on the business. So if you want to add something that really changes your game, that helps you become a real master of transformation and change, and to inspire your people and love your job, check out chiefmakeup.com/mini MBA. So you spoke about presence, mate, in martial arts. I think you and I are both students of flow. There's no doubt about that, right? When you're in flow, when we are present, what I want to create is a bit of a contrast. What's going on in our brains and our bodies when we're in flow, as opposed to when we're the opposite, anxious, freaking out. Can we just paint a bit of a picture of those two things mentally, physiologically?
Yeah, so absolutely. So flow is all about when you get out of your own way. You lose that self-evaluation that you have. You're just in that moment. And it's a beautiful place to be. It's hard to live your life constantly in flow. I think the goal is to be able to get in it when it's valuable and then to be out of it when it's not. But the opposite is to be very aware of what's going on and very concerned about everything, to be in your head, judging and evaluating. And it's important to recognize the difference, to appreciate when you're in both states, and then think about how you were able to get there and what you can do to get out of it. So there's this meta awareness we need to have. But, true connection, I believe, happens when you're in that flow state, when we're both just in that moment. And that's part of what I like about the martial arts. When you're learning something and working with somebody or a group of people, you're in that moment and you lose that objective self-awareness. And that can really be lovely to be in that spot. But we also need to be able to, in a work world, be outside of ourselves and planning and being strategic. So the ability to move in and out is really important, but to recognize when you're in those states and what helped you get there is super important.
Matt, do you think a lot of people have lost the ability to get in flow? Like they just don't get in any part of their life. And if they don't, how important do you think it is that they start doing it in more than one avenue?
So I think it is probably true that there are people for whom that state has been absent in their lives, but I do think we can learn and train ourselves on how to do it. I was very fortunate to have a faculty member at Stanford's Business School where I teach on my podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart. His name's David Melnikoff, and he studies flow, and he studies ways in which we can get into flow. And there are steps that you can take, and I think it can be really accessible to people who put effort into it. The problem with flow is when you want to get into flow, you get in the way of actually getting into flow. So you have to put yourself into a place where you can let go, and then you can ease into it. But it starts with something that you have to focus on, and something that you find challenging, but not so challenging that you can't accomplish it.
Yeah.
But I do think it's
Flow
useful for
model.
people. And even if it's not true flow, as Csikszentmihalyi defined it, it can simply be just being present through meditation, through breathing, through doing something physical where you're very present in what you're doing, mindfulness. All of that, I think, is very beneficial and can help you be more at peace, to relax and recharge, and ultimately to connect with other people.
And the that beautiful description you're giving there of being in flow, the key message here is when you want to think fast, talk smart.
Yes.
This is the call, right? You won't be able to do that unless you're present, external attention on your audience, on who you're talking to, getting outside of your own head, no internal dialogue, lovely relaxed physiology. Got to be relaxed. Breathe a bit. We've got to breathe a bit. I was working with someone recently who was freaking out about a presentation, and I got them to do this practice piece. They got up, and I'm watching them, and I look up at them, and guess what? They're holding their breath.
Yeah, it's very common.
I went,
or breathing very shallow in their upper chest.
Yeah. This guy wasn't even breathing.
Yeah.
I'm not careful. I have to restart him. But thing is, it wasn't for that long. Like that's really a bit hard. But the key was he actually wasn't aware of it until I said, "You breathing," and he went, "Oh," I said, "Breathe deep into your belly."
Yeah.
And let's start again. And he was fine after that.
Yes, breathing is a really important tool for all communication, not just to calm yourself down, but also to regulate your voice, to connect with people through pausing. So breath work is really, really important in communication. And I often encourage people to take on very specific tasks around breath. Be mindful of where your breath is going. Is it your upper chest or your lower chest? How long are you holding your breath versus releasing your breath? All of that can be really helpful. I was just working with a group of people today who these are very technical people. They have a big review with an external agency, and they have to give an hour-long presentation each over the course of several days. These folks rarely speak for 5 minutes at a time. How are they going to speak for an hour without building vocal stamina? Many people aren't going to get up one day and just go run a marathon. They have to train first. You can't expect to speak for an hour without training first. So I encourage them to read out loud for 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, just to build up that stamina so that they can actually be engaging the whole way through. So breath is so important to flow and to communication and the way we use our voice.
We did a podcast maybe 4 or 5 months ago with Roger Love. Do you know Roger? He's the voice coach.
Yeah.
And he actually did it. When we were on the podcast, he gave me a coaching session, and it was all about breath and teaching me how to breathe properly. I talk, because I was getting a bit wrong as well. So what do you work with people most on, Matt? In the one-to-one, I know one of the things you do is you coach people, you do one-to-ones, you do group coaching. What do you work with people most on? What comes your way?
Yeah. So the two things I work most with people on is first anxiety and anxiety management. Many people, and it would surprise you who these people are, very senior leaders of very big international companies still have some anxiety, especially around high stakes situations. So everybody I work with, I try to help them create what I call an anxiety management plan. It's a series of 3 to 5 steps that you can take to help manage your anxiety. Everybody is different, so these plans can be different. Happy to share mine if you'd like to hear it, but it's something that you can do. And then the other big thing I work with people on is structure. I believe communication works best when there is a framework around it. Most people simply list and itemize what it is they're thinking. They take the audience on a journey of their discovery of what it is they want to say. And our brains are not meant for, nor are we good at remembering lists and items. Rather, having a structure, a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end is really important. So I spend a lot of time with people crafting and helping them understand different structures, different tools that they can use to get their points across. So the vast majority of among many other things I work with people on, but the most frequent are anxiety management and leveraging structure to help.
you said you'd be happy to share your
Yeah.
management plan. Could you?
So I still get nervous. I mean, people are like, you wrote a book on anxiety management. You wrote another book of speaking in the moment. You still get nervous? Absolutely. It's not every situation. It's not all the time. Every year, there's an academic conference of people who do what I do, teach communication at top business schools. And I get very nervous when I have to speak in front of these colleagues. And so what I do are three simple things. First, deep breathing, as we talked about, helps me relax, helps make sure my voice is in the right place. Speaking of my voice, and this is going to sound awfully silly, but I say a tongue twister. I say a tongue twister 3 times fast before I go in. Before you and I connected today, I said the same tongue twister. It's a way of warming up my voice. Many of us think, I speak all the time. I don't need to warm up my voice. But if you've ever been an athlete, you should warm up. If you've ever exercised, you should warm up first. So I do that to warm up my voice. Saying a tongue twister actually helps me get present oriented, so I'm not worried about all the things in the future. And then the final thing I do is I remind myself that I have value to bring. Many of us can feel imposter syndrome, can feel like we're not deserving of the interaction that we're having. So I remind myself that you invited me to be here. You think there's something of value. So I remind myself that I have some value to bring. I'm not being braggadocious. I'm not saying I'm the best person ever. It's very easy for me and for many people to get in their heads and be very doubting, to think, do I deserve this? Is anybody going to take anything from what I say? And just remind ourselves that in some way, shape, or form, there's some value that I bring to this interaction. So I do those 3 things before I ever speak in a situation where I get nervous. And it really helps me to calm down, to be present, and to deliver the best I can.
You know those moments when you're about to go on stage and the adrenaline, little nerves hit, adrenaline goes, here, have a pump of adrenaline. And it goes into your body. Your heart starts racing and you're like, I don't need this now because I've got to speak beautifully and clearly, and I don't want to hear the shakiness in my voice.
Yeah.
What do you do when that happens? Everybody gets this from time to time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Not as much anymore, but every now and then it happens.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear what you do in those circumstances, but here's what I know. Adrenaline is part of your body's fight or flight system.
That's right.
Most of us, being nervous speaking in front of others is part of being human. Those of us who study it believe it's just part of who we are. So it's normal and natural. Adrenaline's function is to move you from threat to safety. So it's about movement. It's trying to get you to move. That's why we get shaky.
Exactly.
So let's do what it's asking us to do. Let's move, but let's move with purpose. What you'll see a lot of people do is they shift and they sway and they rock back and forth. That's not helping, and it's distracting your audience. Rather, move with purpose. If I'm standing in front of a big room presenting, I take a big step in, big broad gestures, and I welcome everybody to the talk. That movement forward, those big broad gestures, gives that adrenaline a place to go. I'm fulfilling the obligation the adrenaline is motivating me for. So if I'm virtual, I can lean forward, I can gesture. So the way to reduce the shakes is to move, but move in a way that is consistent with what you're trying to accomplish rather than distracting or detracting people. Deep breathing can also help because it helps get you grounded. So those are the 2 things that I do: move with purpose, do some deep breaths. Do you have any tricks or hacks that you use to help?
Mate, it's almost exactly the same.
Okay.
But what I try and do is I try and link it to the structure piece.
Yeah.
So what I'll do spatial marking. So I try and think, well, I've got 3 sections or 5 sections to this particular speech. I'll imagine those in 5 circles on the stage.
Yeah.
Open part 2, this might, establish the problem set. Part 3, talk about what the solution might be. Part 4, talk about a solution, and part 5, close. And so what I do then is I know that if I get into step 1, I just got to focus on that. Right. But I did hear a really cool thing the other day. I was listening to the podcast that Tim Ferriss did with Scott Glenn, the Hollywood.
Yeah.
And he was talking about when he has to learn a massive script, he learns it from the back to the front, not front to back, so that he's more familiar with the end. And he gets more and more calm as he goes. I'd actually never heard that particular thing. I thought that is
there's some memory research that says that when you chunk content, so think about a presentation, beginning, middle, end. That's very high level of doing this. When you practice those pieces separately and in different orders. And what it does for you is 2 things. One, It makes sure that you touch every part of the presentation when your mental focus is at its best, which is usually early on. Most of us worry most about how we start, and we figure, well, once I get going, I'll figure out how I end. And then we get to the end and it's like, oh my goodness, how do I end this thing?
Yeah.
So if we practice it in chunks, again, I'm not talking memorize, but if we just go through the different parts in different orders, that can help. The second thing it also helps with is when you practice in a disjointed way, when you actually put it all together, it forces you to really think about how you connect. And those transitions between places make a huge difference. People who are really good at communication are able to connect the different pieces together so it's very smooth. Those who aren't as good at it, it's very clunky. It's things like next and so instead of a nice bridge. So when you practice in this chunking way, it can really help you to feel more comfortable and to help your audience by really linking the different pieces together.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to talk about your 6 steps to talk smart, which is in your book. But just before that, being someone that comes from that world of neurolinguistics, I've got a real passion for words, study hypnosis and things like that. If we just talk about the 3 basic elements of communication, the words you use, the quality of your voice, pitch and tone of voice, and nonverbals, there's this big debate out there about what's most important out of the 3. And I'll say, in my opinion, it's the congruent alignment between all 3 that's most important.
Agreed.
Okay. What I wanted to ask you was, what have you learned about the interplay between these 3?
I love this discussion, and I'm fascinated by the very same things you are. What I know from my many years of doing this work and decades of doing this work is many people fixate on the words. And words are important, but how you deliver those words, both in the quality and tone of your voice, but what you do with your body to see if it's congruent or not, can be equally and sometimes more important. So for me, as you said, it is a blending of those, and it is a focusing on all of those that really can make a difference. We, I think, sometimes delude ourselves by fixating on crafting slides and choosing, what fonts and all that. That's important, but we over-invest our effort there, and then we work against ourselves because we don't give ourselves time to practice. We don't check in with others to see if we're coming across the way we do. We don't think about, are we so involved in what we're saying because of our curse of knowledge and curse of passion that we're not making it accessible? So to me, it is, as you said, a blending of all of them. And if you said, where in all your work would you, of those 3, tell people to spend more time? Most people over-index on the actual word choice. So I would say how you say those words is probably more important in terms of where you focus. But the ultimate answer is you want to blend all 3 and spend time on all of them.
Okay, let's talk a bit about this 6-step method to think faster, talk smarter. Why that particular problem that you're solving? Like, have you seen it happening just all the time? And what are the 6 steps?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, growing up with the last name Abrahams, I always went first. So I understand firsthand the pressure of in the moment having to speak. But if we all think about it, and as you alluded to in your introduction, most of our communication is not planned. It's not the presentation, the pitch, the meetings with agendas. As leaders and just as human beings, we are constantly speaking in the moment, answering questions, giving feedback, introducing ourselves, fixing the mistakes we've made, making small talk. All of those are what I call spontaneous speaking. And if we've ever had any training on communication, it is mostly in a planned way. Very rarely do we talk about how to speak in the moment. So that was the underlying impetus for this. The real causal start of all of this is the deans at Stanford's business school came to me about 9 years ago with a problem. They said our incredibly bright students are struggling with cold calling. Remember back in school where the teacher would say, "What do you think?" and you had to respond. And these amazingly bright students who knew the answers were not able to articulate themselves well. And the professors were disappointed. The students felt bad. So as the communication guy, they said, "Hey, can you help us?" And so I did a deep dive into multiple fields of study, into psychology, sociology, anthropology, neuroscience, even improvisation. And through that, came the development of this methodology that you're referring to. It's got 6 steps. The first 4 are all about mindset and approach. And then the last 2 steps are about messaging. How do I structure message and focus it? So this is all designed to help us think faster. And when I say think faster, I literally don't mean the clock speed of how your thoughts. I mean pattern recognition. What makes an athlete great at what they do is they are able to recognize patterns very quickly, and based on those patterns, respond. And so we can actually prepare to be spontaneous, just like an athlete might do a whole series of drills. So when they're in the game, they can respond in the moment. So that's think faster. Now, talk smarter is all about just being more efficient and making sure your communication is clear, concise, and compelling. So that's what the methodology is designed to do. I'll give you some insight into the actual steps without itemizing all of them. It starts with anxiety management. As we've already discussed, anxiety looms large in both planned and spontaneous speaking. We can learn to manage it. We have to change the way we see these situations. Many of us see them as threats, yet they could be opportunities, so that reframe is helpful. And many of us want to be perfect in our communication. We want to give the right answer, the best feedback, be the most interesting. And that pressure we put on ourselves actually works against us achieving those goals. And then the final step in mindset, and this is one that people find very counterintuitive, is listening. Much of success in communication comes from listening, not just to the words that are said, but how they're said, where they're said, when they're said. That can give you tremendous insight. And if I think about it and really reflect on what you're saying, that can help me respond in the moment better. And then the last 2 steps have to do with structure. We've already addressed it, rather than listing information. And then the final step is, once you have a structure, how can I make the information in the structure concise? Attention is the most precious commodity we have in the world today, at least in my mind. And how can we not only get people's attention, but sustain it? Sustained attention I define as engagement. And you have to think about concision, being clear, being concise. My mother has this wonderful saying. I know she didn't create it, but I attribute it to her. Tell the time, don't build the clock. Many of us are clock builders when we communicate. So if we can have the right mindset and approach, we structure our messages, and we work on being concise and clear, we can be much better communicators in any situation, but especially spontaneous speaking.
Right, Chief, more from Matt in a minute. Now, recently, I had Juliet Wright, OAM, founder and director of Give It and Recovery, on the show. We spoke about revolutionizing misguided charitable giving, having a million conversations, and leaning into anxiety. Here's what Juliet had to say about giving done differently.
I just want to make sure the right people get the right things in the right way. And I also want to make sure that people like you and me can have an absolutely direct impact on a disaster event that's happening overseas. So, there's a flood in Bangladesh. I don't want you to post your microwave over there. I want you to just spend $50 and buy one locally. And it's a donation, which is great, but you're literally buying a microwave locally, which will be in their local language with the local cords on the end of it, so it works in their home. And they have the warranty, and the local business is doing well now.
You can listen to that remarkable conversation with Juliet by going to chiefmaker.com/330. While you're there, Chief, the full catalogue can be found at chiefmaker.com/listen now. All right, Chief, let's get back to the brilliant Matt Abrahams.
Are there any structures in particular that you would say, if you just had this in your back pocket, it would help?
Let me give you one.
Yep.
I think this structure, I call it the Swiss Army knife of communication, because you can use it in so many circumstances. It's 3 simple questions. What? So what? Now what? What is the information you're sharing? It could be your update, your feedback, your product, your service, your belief. So what is, why is it important and relevant to the person or people you're talking to? And then the now what is what comes next. It might be, let me show you and I do a demonstration, or let me take your questions, or let's set up another meeting. If I'm giving feedback, it's here's what I think you should do next time. So by leveraging a structure, it can help. And I encourage everybody to think about, and this is not just speaking, this is writing. I don't know about you, Greg, but I get emails sometime where I'm reading going, what the heck does the person want? If the subject line is the now what, the action, and then the body of the email is the what and the so what, all of a sudden it becomes much easier for me. So leveraging a structure like that can be very helpful. Now, if you'll allow me, I want to take a time out. I just use that structure to answer the question. I told you what the structure was. I told you why it was important and gave you examples of how you can use it. It's an easy way to package information. A good structure does two things for you fundamentally. First thing it does is it makes it easy for your audience to understand you because it is clear, concise, and logical. The second thing it does is it helps you as the communicator prioritize what you want to say. When I need to say something, I can say it in lots of ways, and this helps me prioritize. What am I trying to get across? Why is it important to you? And what do I want you to do next? By answering those questions, it helps me focus and prioritize. So many structures exist: comparison, contrast, conclusion, past, present, future, what's problem, solution, benefit. Many people know STAR, situation, task, analysis, results. These are all different structures. So find the ones that work for you and deploy them.
Absolutely. I use one when I'm telling stories.
Yeah, what's the structure?
It's a Hollywood one, and I take a Hollywood.
Yeah.
Right. What was the situation? What was happening? I haven't done this still. I haven't thought about the exact structure, but hey, what was the situation? Hey, then something happened.
Yeah, the conflict or the challenge,
Something happens. Something goes wrong. Whoa, and then what's the event and the ups and the downs and the left and the right? Oh, okay, that's great. Then there's the moment, the critical moment that solved the whole thing, right? Then the bit at the end where it's all happy and the learning and the lesson at the end of it. And when I tell a story on stage, invariably, if it's a detailed one, that's what I'm telling. I just try and replicate Hollywood. They must know what they're doing.
Right. I think that's so important, and I love that you are using that a narrative like that. I had a student who was trained at a seminary. He was a preacher before he came to class, and he said that they taught a structure for sermons. And I said, "Oh, what is it?" And I love saying it because it all rhymes. It's me, we, thee, we, me. So you start with some issue that's important to you.
Yeah.
You then talk about how it applies to everybody. Yeah. You talk about what the deity or spirit or whatever you believe in says about it. Then how does that information impact the congregation? And ultimately, how does it talk to you? So I love me, we, thee, we, me. Yep. Structures are really helpful.
Absolutely. You're like being a student of hypnosis, there's generally a structure to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You have a lot to remember. You might be talking for 20 minutes, like you got to know. Hey, that is fantastic. So I get these questions all the time. People say, Greg, the person I'm sending to you, they're really, really bad at synthesizing information and turn to something that's consumable. They pull the clock, they talk for half an hour, everyone's glazed over in a trance.
Right.
No one can get a word in sideways, they drive you nuts. So what do you do if you're the person who can't get concise? And what do you do if you're on the receiving end of that and you've had enough?
Okay. So when I work with people who struggle to be clear and concise, I work with them on what I call bottom lining. Think to yourself, what is the bottom line of what you want to say, and start there. Many of us start at the beginning and we build to what we're getting to. So I say, what's the bottom line? And by forcing people to focus on that, I say, okay, so get me to that bottom line. What are the minimal number of words you need to use to get me to the bottom line? So I'm really helping people prioritize, but you have to anchor yourself at the bottom line. Now, if I am listening to somebody who rambles on and on, the most polite way I know to help the person and to help all of us who are being victimized by this bloviating is to paraphrase. So paraphrasing to me is where you take some key element of what somebody has said, you speak it back to them, and then you either ask a question or you connect it to something else. So if this would never happen, Greg, but imagine you're just talking. I might jump in and say, cost is really important because you had just talked about cost. I'm curious, how do you think we can best address costs of this new product in the next 6 months? So what I have just done is interrupted you politely because I'm saying what you just said was valuable. And then I ask you a question that requires a very specific answer. So I'm taking you from this blather and focusing you. And we have to realize that if I'm running the meeting that everybody else is hearing this in, if I don't do that, then it's not just your credibility that's sinking as you keep going, but everybody else is seeing. They expect me. I'm the leader. I should do something about this. My credibility takes a dive as well. So it is incumbent on you. It's your job. Stop that from going. And I think the best way I know how to do it is you extract something of value they say, ask a direct question, link it to something else on the agenda, but take the floor away in an appropriate way to keep things moving.
Yeah, that is outstanding. Now, Matt, I've got a couple of final questions. Before we do that, just so people understand, if you do want to work with Matt, he does do coaching one-to-ones. He does do keynotes at conferences. I know they're wildly popular. Get involved. He's got his book. You can see it behind him, Think Faster.
Yeah.
Talk Smarter. He's got his podcast, which is Think Fast, Talk Smart. Listen to that. So that's the best way to talk to Matt, and it's mattabrahams.com, and I'll put all that in the show notes. Okay, Matt, let's do 3 of our normal rapid fire questions. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. If you could form your ultimate personal performance support team, right? Think doctors, trainers, psychologists, a group of people that you meet with regularly to make you like an elite athlete would have, right? Who would you pick? Top 3 people and why? Just top 3 people.
So one would be my martial arts instructor. Been with him for a long time, helps me feel real grounded. I would have a comedian. There's so many I would think of, but comedy for me is a big release, and it is, I am in awe of what comedians do, especially when it comes to speaking in the moment. And I would certainly have my family. They know me well, and they are empowered and feel empowered, I should say. Anybody can be empowered to give me feedback, but my family feels empowered to give me just honest, blunt feedback. I'll never forget when my wife, so I'm talking about my extended family, my parents and my wife and my kids. When the woman who became my wife met my mother for the first time, she came away and says, does your family even like each other? Because my family is so directly, brutally honest. And it is through that feedback, through that honest information that I think good change happens. Yep. And so that would be my team. It would be my martial arts instructor, a comedian who can help me just see the world differently. I think a good comedian helps you see the world differently. And my favorite comedians, and I think you might enjoy them too because you like words, are the comedians who play with words. Yeah. I think that's fascinating. I think probably the best comedian who did that ever was George Carlin. And then having my family, that would be the team I'd want around me.
What's the best advice a mentor or coach has ever given you?
There's so much good advice that I have received over the years. I think the best advice I ever received was when I was going for my first degree black belt. The person I'm thinking of turned to me right before I went into the room to do it. And he said, have fun. You deserve it. And it shook my world because this fun was the farthest thing from my mind. Yeah. And to think of this experience, which was going to be grueling and was, as fun, just totally changed my approach. I could have fun and still do something that was grueling. And the fact that he said, you deserve it, meant a lot to me because for me, that there's some imposter syndrome, there's some lack of confidence, and to think that we are deserving of the challenges we face and the rewards that we reap was really helpful to me. So have fun, you deserve it was some of the best advice I've ever received.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, thanks so much for your time. Yeah. I'll just give you the floor to finish with a final message of wisdom and hope.
Thank you, Greg. This was a true pleasure to chat with you. The best way to get good at communication or anything is 3 things: repetition, reflection, and feedback. You have to practice. You have to put in the reps. There's no shortcut. You have to reflect. If we don't, we're subject to that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So we have to take the time to reflect. And then finally, we have to reach out to others. We are not the best judges of our communication. Trusted others, loved ones, they have to give us feedback to help us. I encourage everybody to work on their communication. I believe communication is operationalized leadership. If we don't work on it, there's no way we can meet our maximum potential as leaders and as people.
Matt, beautiful way to finish, mate. Thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Righto, Chief. That sums it up for this week. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Matt Abrahams. You know what? I don't think at any point in our careers do we ever talk about the absolute criticality of your performance in front of people in meetings, in one-to-ones, on stage. I've said for years that the performance theatre of executives, one of the biggest ones, is when we are presenting, when we are speaking, when we are on our feet. That is our time to perform.
So Matt's messages, his techniques and strategies are critical. And even if you've learned stuff about this before, I recommend going back and reviewing it again through the lens of Matt's work. Check him out. All the links and resources can be found in the show notes. Just go to chiefmaker.com/332.
And if you'd like to stay in touch with Chiefmaker, just go to chiefmaker.com/subscribe. Now, Chief, if you're yet to rate the episode and subscribe, I hope you'll do so soon. It helps others see the magnificent value that the chiefs and gurus on the show bring to their life and career. So make sure you hit subscribe on your podcast app now, give it a 5-star rating if you think it's worthy, and leave a short review about your favourite episode.
Righto, Chief. As always, remember to stay epic.